Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. For Jessica, who loved stories. For Annie, who loved them too. And for Dee, who heard this one first. Contents. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. I'll read this too. Quidditch Stadium, Broomshed, Hogsmeade, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Hogsmeade Station, Forbidden Forest, Whomping Willow, Greenhouse, Hagrid's Hut. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4, Private Drive, were proud to say that they are perfectly numbered. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of the firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Doodly, and their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret and their greatest fear that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband was un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping Potters away. They didn't want Doodly messing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up in the dull, gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside, so suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Doodly into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl floated past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Doodly goodbye, but missed because Doodly was now having a chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. Because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something bigger, a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Private Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said private drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large odor of drills was hoping to get that day. But the edge of town drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about it. People in clothes. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this wasn't stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see a couple of them were young at all. Why, that man has to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald-green cloak. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic jam moved on. A few months later, Mr. Dursley arrived at the Groening's car park. He minded back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owl swooping past in broad daylight. Those people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his leg and walk across the road to buy himself a bun of the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in clothes until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot was whispering. This lot was whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag that he caught them clutching a large donut in a bag. Then he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead, fearfully. He looked back at the whisperers as if wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretly not to disrupt, seized his telephone and had almost finished dialing his phone number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter was such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he was sure his nephew was called Harry, or ever seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. Or there was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted. But the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem upset being most knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare. Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even Margot, like yourself, should be celebrating this happy day. And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle. Whatever that was, he was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped for, because he didn't approve of imagination. Harder to concentrate on drills that morning. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. Shoo, said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mr. Dursley had a nice normal day. He told him over dinner about Mrs. Next Door's problem with her daughter and how Dooley learned a new word, shan't. And Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Doodly had been put to bed, he went into the living room, time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, the bird watchers everywhere had reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today, although owls normally hunt at night and hardly ever seen in daylight. There have been hundreds of sightseeing of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McAfee with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well said the weatherman. I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers far about us Kent, Yorkshire and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, when I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair, shooting stars all over Britain. I was flying by daylight. Mysterious people with cloaks over the place and whisper about patterns. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He had ever to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mr. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news. Mr. Dursley mumbled, owls, shooting stars, and there were lots of funny-looking people in town today. So, snapped Mrs. Dursley, well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with you. You know, her a lot. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether and dared tell her he heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said, as casually as he could, their son, he'd about totally late now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry, nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh yes, said Mrs. Dursley. He out sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down the private drive. I thought it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related, a pair of fool, he didn't think he could bear it. He didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near and Mrs. Dursley. Him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well that he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect him. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting on into an easy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting all as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly as on the far corner of Private Drive. It didn't so much as quiver than a car door slammed in the next street. nor when 2 owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all.